Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Breaking Free from Churchianity. If you're like me and grew up as an evangelical, you were taught from a very early age about the devil, demons, and spiritual warfare, most likely. And it was probably a big part of your religious experience. Now, I was taught that the devil is a literal being, that demons are literal beings, that spiritual warfare is real, and that we are constantly being attacked by this invisible enemy. And so that was really my context as far as these things go. Now, from my earliest years, I can remember my pastor talking about the devil and demons and spiritual warfare and, the warfare of the believer and things of that nature. And really Satan or, the devil was blamed for just about everything. I mean, there was very few things that the devil wasn't blamed for. I mean, everything from temptation to failing to, adhere to God's standards or the biblical standards, whatever it may be. And also, things in the world, even communist or of the devil, so it was a really wide breadth of things that the devil was blamed for. Now, God representing righteousness and good, and Satan representing rebellion and evil against God's authority, was the foundation of the battle between the forces of good and evil. In other words, there was this cosmic war going on between the devil, who represented all that was evil, and God, who represented everything that was good and righteous. And so it was this cosmic battle that we were all involved in. We may not understand it or know it, but we were all involved in it. And this was the thing really behind the scenes that was driving everything. And a big question was, which side are you on? God's good side or the devil's evil side? Were you operating in the flesh and what you wanted, or were you operating based on the Spirit and what God wanted? Which side of this battle of good and evil did you find yourself on? Now, the devil has been used to demonize people, institutions, organizations, people groups, nations, political systems from the earliest times of man's religious experience. And it's really seen in the world as well. You watch a Hollywood movie that has, something about the devil, you'll see that much of what they put out follows along the line of what the church says about the devil and him being, this evil, this personification of evil, and then God being, if you will, the personification of good. And of course, that represented by Jesus. And so this ideal of good and evil is very much not just believed in the church, but it's also believed in the world. Now, the devil was God's, if you will, antagonist. And, it just didn't seem that God was able to defeat this guy. And no matter what he did, even with the coming of Jesus, it just always seemed like the devil was able to hang on somehow. But based on Christian teaching and, revelations, in the end, the devil's going to be defeated. He'll be thrown into what was called the lake of fire, along with his angels. And the ultimate victory would come once Christ came. And that is what the believer should be looking forward to. So yes, you're going through a lot now in this life, but one day the devil will be thrown down, and that will be the ultimate victory. But until then, you just have to persevere and keep on going. Now, in all those years, and after all those sermons, not one pastor walked me through the origins of the belief in Satan. In other words, I've heard a lot of sermons on this, and not one time did the minister walk us through why we should believe in Satan. In other words, what is the origins of this belief? Where did it come from? And what was its evolution over many centuries, cultures, languages? How did the concept come to be in the way that we see it today? How has the concept been weaponized and used to control people through fear and to attack one's opponents and to point the finger of blame? See, the devil is tempting me. Or I need to plead the blood, or you need to be freed from the devil's hold, or they're just of the devil. Have you heard that before? Yeah, he's just of the devil. This is something that has developed over many, many centuries. And without going back and understanding what are the origins of it, it's very difficult to understand whether or not this is something we should hold to. So the problem was I had never sat down and did the work on the origins of this idea of Satan, how it developed and what it has become over the centuries. And without understanding, the biggest thing about deconstruction is when you're doing this, no matter what it is, you always want to ask yourself, what is the origin of this? And it's not enough to say, well, the origin is in the Bible. That's not really true, because a lot of things that ended up in the Bible started somewhere else. Now, I know that wasn't what a lot of people are taught, but the reality is that most theologians will tell you that the majority of the beliefs that we have started somewhere else other than the scriptures. They may have initially found their ideal there, which we need to go to that as well. And that may have been where people began to develop the ideal. But there have been tremendous influences on that are outside the Bible. and that predate the Bible. And so we really do then need to go and say, where did all this start, and how did we get to where we're at today? In this series of videos, my hope is to deconstruct the theology of the devil, or Satan, if you will, demons, and spiritual warfare in a way that will be useful to your spiritual life and walk. Now, that's what I hope. Now, here's the thing. I'm not here to try and get you to believe like I do. I'm not here to say, hey, you need to see things the way I do. You may, when we're done, you may look at this and go, well, I don't know if I agree with, where Scott came out on this. That's okay. I don't really care. What I'm doing is to try and walk you through kind of what I went through. And if it's of use to you, that's wonderful. There may be parts of this that help you understand a little better what you believe in regards to these things. It may totally change how you believe. It's possible. I've had that happen with people. Or you may go away from this and go, I don't know, that doesn't really change how I see it. The question is really this, not so much what do I think, but what is the Spirit of God telling you within? What's your heart telling you? And are you open to change? You see, if you're open to change, that's great. That's great. At least then God can bring something new to you and you can grow. But if you say, I don't know if I'm really ready for that. I don't know if I really believe that. That's okay. Then that's a sign you need to stay where you're at. But either way, my goal isn't to try and get you to believe like me. My goal is to challenge you on what you believe so that you understand why you believe it. So let's just briefly look at the etymology of the word Satan and the devil and have a little better understanding of where they came from. That'll be our start. The word Satan is derived from the Hebrew Satan, meaning to oppose or to act as an adversary. It really just means the adversary, generally speaking. The first time that we see the word being used in the Hebrew Scriptures in the Old Covenant, we see it in Job 1, 6 through 12. And here it says Satan appears as a member of the heavenly court, challenging Job's righteousness. But it's also interesting to note that Satan did not bring up Job. God brought Job up. And so when Job comes here with what's called the sons of God, and he was considered a son of God, then he's given this name, which is really the word for adversary. So it says the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and the adversary came with them. So this would have meant that he was a spiritual being whose goal, or his assignment, if you will, was to be the antagonist of some sort, to look at things from a different perspective, to test things, to see what their true value was. Companies have people like that. They take their products and test their products in all kinds of situations. Well, and the reason companies do that is they want to see how valuable is this product to our customers. I mean, you think of a piece of luggage, that luggage needs to be able to take a pounding. And so the only way to know if this is something you want to sell to your customer is to test it. And so that's kind of what this angelic being is, or if you will, spiritual being. His role was to test things to see what they're made of. And so he shows up and God says, hey, come over here. I want to talk to you about Job, because he's God's guy to test things, to see what they're made of, see if they're of any value. And so when God brings it up, brings up Job, Satan, the adversary, if you will, says, and he starts to challenge God's viewpoint of this. And then God says, okay, we'll test it. Let's test it. Let's see what happens. That's really the only way that you know the value of something, is to test it. And so that's really this spiritual being's role in, if you will, the court, the heavenly court. Another verse is in Zechariah 3, 1 through 2, where the adversary stands to accuse Joshua, the high priest, but the Lord ends up rebuking him. And now they use the word Satan here. It really should not be the common name. It should be used just as a title, really, the adversary. It's the same person we see in Job, but this individual is accusing Joshua before the high priest, who is the high priest, I should say, and the Lord rebukes him. And so that's the second time that we see it. But again, it's really, in some ways, more of an idea than it is a person. And then in 1 Chronicles 21:1, we see that the adversary incites David to take a census of Israel, leading to divine judgment. And so, again, the ideal here is of a being who is sort of an antagonist. Now, in all three of these scriptures, this spiritual being is not seen as evil. I want to make that as clear as I can. Matter of fact, there is not, regardless of what conservative theologians tell you, there is not a developed theology of Satan or the devil, if you will, in the Old Testament scriptures. There's not. Now let's look at the etymology of the word devil, which comes from the Septuagint, and it's a Greek word. And it came out of the Hebrew scriptures translated into Greek, which is the Septuagint. And its usage and meaning differ somewhat from later Christian context. The Greek often translated as devil is diabolos, meaning accuser or slanderer. So Satan was one who was the adversary, or if you will, the tester. This one is accuser or slanderer. It generally describes an adversarial figure or one who is opposing through accusation. The term diabolos is used in the book of Job to describe Satan as an adversary and accuser. However, in most other parts of the Septuagint, references to supernatural evil beings are translated using other terms, such as daimonion, which is the word for demon or spirit. This reflects a broader cultural view of evil spirits and supernatural beings rather than the singular concept of the devil that later developed in Christian theology. Thus, while the term devil can be found in the Septuagint, it was not necessarily understood as a single central evil being, but more as an accuser or an opposing spirit. So what we find here then is not something that is developed in the terms of a theology that you can hold. Now, the word Lucifer appears in the Bible in Isaiah 14:12, where it says, "How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" And the term Lucifer here is derived from the Latin Vulgate translation, where the word Lucifer means light bearer or morning star. The translation refers to the Hebrew word Hallel, which means shining one or bright one. In context, Isaiah 14 is really a taunt towards the king of Babylon, using poetic and symbolic language to describe his fall from power and his arrogance. Now, we see that in Daniel, where he is prideful and goes crazy. God allows him to go mad. And in his madness, he sees, hey, I'm not as great as I thought I was. So the reference to Lucifer in this passage originally described a proud Babylonian king who fell from grace rather than Satan. So do you see that? This is not a theological development of Satan. It's not really having anything to do with an angelic being. It has to do with a king who was prideful and was arrogant and was brought down. Later Christian traditions, though, which were influenced by early church writings, connected this passage with the fall of Satan. Yet that's not there, leading to the association of Lucifer with the devil. However, this linkage is more theological than linguistic, as the original context in Isaiah did not refer to Satan. So again, we see this is not a developed theology in regards to the being that we would come to know as Satan. Now, Judaism includes the concept of Satan, but its interpretation differs significantly from that of Christianity and Islam. In Jewish theology, Satan is not a rebellious fallen angel or the embodiment of evil, opposing God. Instead, the term Satan literally means adversary or accuser and refers to a role rather than a distinct autonomous being. So this ideal of the adversary is more of a role rather than an autonomous being who is trying to oppose God. Now, according to Judaism, this ideal of the accuser or Satan in Job, as well as in Zechariah, the context here functions more as a prosecuting attorney in the heavenly court, testing individuals' fidelity to God. He operates under God's authority and is not an independent force of evil. In other words, there's not this dualism in Judaism that you see in Christianity and Islam. There's no good and evil force that are going at each other. There's no spiritual beings who are trying to get outside of God's authority and attack God's creation and things of that nature. That's not how Judaism sees that. And so most of Judaism today would tell you that there is no devil, just like there's no hell. And they would tell you that this is just simply an ideal more than it is an autonomous being. Instead of an external evil being, Judaism emphasizes the Yetzer Hara, or evil inclination, an internal drive within humans that tempts them to stray from God's commandment. So to the Yetzer Hara, which is a rabbinic teaching, that is more in line with an internal issue with human beings to stray from the truth, to stray from righteousness and things of that nature. Now, there are some mystical texts, some Kabbalistic writings that delve deeper into concepts of evil and adversarial forces. But these ideals are not mainstream within Jewish theology. So those tend to be more fringe today. And for the most part, Judaism doesn't accept those things. Judaism rejects the notion of dualistic forces, as I said earlier, battling for supremacy. Everything, including what humans perceive as evil, is under God's dominion. So instead of looking at things and perceiving things as good and evil, it's really more about human responsibility and freedom, or if you will, free will. Humans are accountable for their actions without attributing misdeeds to an external evil entity. Now, that's very different in some ways from Christianity, which gives a lot of credence to the devil and Satan in some ways from the New Testament scriptures. But Judaism doesn't see that. They see the individual as being responsible for their actions because they have free will. And so this would be a distinct difference. And it's something that we need to understand because when we are talking about things that came out of the Old Covenant, we need to understand that today Judaism has developed in such a way that they do not hold to those things. What I want to do is to look at sort of the origins of Satan and the ideal of the devil. And we've already looked at the etymology of the words. We've looked at kind of what Judaism says about the devil. But what we want to do now is to go back to the origins of when this ideal of Satan and the devil began. And to do that, you really do have to go back to the exile. Now, before the exile, when Judea was defeated by the Babylonians, and many of the people either died or they were taken prisoners back to Babylon, back to Babylonia, if you will. And it was during this time that, or soon thereafter, that the Babylonians were conquered by the Persian Empire, the Perso-Media Empire. And so the Persians and the Medes defeated the Babylonians. And after that, the Israelites, the Jews, would have been introduced to Zoroastrianism. And this would have been the first time for them to really come into this ideal of dualism. Now, dualism applies in many different contexts, but in this context, the ideal of good versus evil. At this moment, most of Genesis has probably not been written yet. And there's really no understanding, if you will, of the garden, of good and evil and things of that nature. But out of the experience of the Israelites in Babylon with Zoroastrianism, which is a Persian religion, old Persian religion, they would have been exposed to this dualism, this ideal of good and evil. And Zoroastrianism had a theological understanding of what we would consider to be the devil, who would represent and personify evil. And so that all of that would have been very new to them, because there's no place in the scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures, where the prophets come to the people and say, listen, I know you're being tempted by the devil. Okay, I know the devil's evil. He's trying to tempt you to do evil, and it's really hard, but you just got to fight that temptation, man. That's not what they do. The prophets come to the people and say, stop what you're doing. Do good to each other, love each other, do good to the foreigner, to the poor, to the widow. Stop what you're doing. Stop worshiping these idols. The prophets never assign blame to the devil or to this cosmic force. The responsibility lies squarely with Israel. It lies squarely with the Jews. It's their responsibility to make these changes. And there's also no threat of hell. Just throwing that in there. The prophets don't ever say, well, if you keep doing this, you're going to end up in hell. That's never there either. So the understanding then of the devil did not come out of Israel's experience under the law. That's not where it came from. It came from Israel's exposure to Zoroastrianism and this ideal of good and evil, or if you will, dualism. Now from that, the Israelites would have brought back this understanding or dualism to when they came back to the land and they were brought back there. And they would have brought with them this understanding then that there was kind of forces of good and evil. And between the time, say, around 500 BC up until around 330, 340 BC, this would have developed, this Zoroastrian ideal of good and evil would have developed within Judaism. And about that time, the Greeks, under Alexander the Great, conquered most of the known world. And part of that being Israel, including northern Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem. But when Alexander the Great came, he was very magnanimous. He allowed the Jews to continue to worship however they wanted to worship and to go, to continue in their specific practices. But during that time, there was a process called Hellenization. And from about the 330s up until around 160 BC, there would have been this process of Hellenization. And Hellenization is simply, Greek ideals, Greek philosophy, Greek language, Greek laws, Greek art, Greek ways of thinking. This Greek culture, if you will, that had been introduced to the Israelites would not have been something that they readily accepted, although over time, many of them did. And so as time went by, if you were schooled in Plato and Socrates, and you knew how to write Greek, which would be similar to writing English or speaking English today in the business language. I mean, there's no country in the world you go to that if you're in international business, those people know English. They can write English. And so that's the international business language. Well, in those days, Greek was. And it maintained that for years and years and years. And so this was, if you will, the process of Hellenization, which the Israelites really opposed, the religious leaders especially. It wasn't really until that early part of the 2nd century BC that the Israelites rebelled against the authority of the Greeks, and especially because the Seleucids were defaming the temple and actually put a pig on the altar, and that was really going too far. And when that happened, the Jews rebelled. And the Maccabeans, which was called the Maccabean Revolt, occurred, and they defeated, if you will, the Greeks and drove them out of Israel. And so that was a huge matter of fact, that's celebrated during Hanukkah. That's what the celebration is about in Hanukkah, is the defeat of the Greeks by the Jews and driving them out of Jerusalem and out of Israel. And then for the first time in a very long time, the Israelites once again have their country back. The problem is during this intertestamental period from about 160 up until about the time that the Romans came in 68 AD, in 68 BC, there was a tremendous amount of inner conflict. And that inner conflict was not just political, but it was also religious. And it was during this time that these sects began to develop, the sect of the Pharisees and the sect of the Sadducees. And the Pharisees would have been a more liberal form of Judaism. The Sadducees would have been the more conservative, the more traditional, if you will. And these two sects would go their different ways. And one of the big differences is that the Pharisees believed in this spiritual war. They believed in the devil. They believed, if you will, in Satan. And the Sadducees did not. One of the things that Hellenization brought to the Jews was a belief in the spiritual afterlife. Before that, Judaism really had no understanding of a spiritual afterlife. And it was this being exposed to this Hellenization, the Greek culture, that they began to learn the religious myths of the Greeks and the reality that the Greeks believed in the afterlife and that souls would go to an afterlife. And now from this, the Jews developed their own understanding of the afterlife and spiritual beings, if you will, demons. And so it was these two things, Zoroastrianism and Greek mythology, that came together, that kind of fused together with Judaism to begin to develop this ideal of this cosmic force, the devil, and demons that were in opposition to God and trying to defeat him. Now, during the 2nd century BC, the Jews went through tremendous religious changes. There was a lot of infighting and a lot of theological wars, if you will. The Maccabees at one point were basically kicked out. They were very conservative, very traditional, and almost to the point of being zealots. And it got so much to the point that the Jews that were more Hellenized just couldn't handle it anymore, and they pushed them out. And they were backed by the Sadducees. And so this time was a time when a lot of what's called apocalyptic literature was being written. And this apocalyptic literature had the ideal of great armies that one day would fight in an ending battle that would bring about the end of the earth. And the apocalyptic literature would if you will, be written about God coming with his angels. It was during this time that angelology actually was developed during the intertestamental period, and would come and defeat, all the Gentile forces. And a lot of this then developed during that time. And there were 3 books in which most of it was developed. And the first was called the Book of Jubilees. And usually these writings were really directed more at one's enemies, theological enemies, than they were necessarily anything else. And it was a way to use apocalyptic literature to sort of attack what someone else believed. And so the Book of Jubilees was one of these. Matter of fact, the Book of Jubilees is included in this, I believe, the Egyptian Coptic scriptures. It was originally it's part of what's called the Apocrypha. It was in those scriptures, and the Catholic Church still uses them. But the Protestant Church refused to use them, and also the early church fathers did not include the Book of Jubilees. But it's from the Book of Jubilees that you find the development, really, of this ideal of Satan and demons and the ideal of this spiritual cosmic war. And it's a writing that was very, very influential on the Jewish people. And then another book is called Enoch 1 and Enoch 2, but especially Enoch 1 elaborates on the celestial hierarchies and the origins of evil. And now Satan is no longer just a one who opposes for the sake of testing. Now the devil, or Satan, if you will, is an individual, and that's personified in this person who leads this hierarchy of angels. And these angels have fallen from heaven, and they are following him, and he is the enemy of God, and God is using these situations, if you will, to bring about his will. And there's this major fight between these two groups. And it's here in these 3 books, Enoch 1 and Enoch 2 and the Book of Jubilees, that we see that a development, a hierarchy, if you will, in regards to the understanding of Satan and the devil. And this is what these books over time, and most scholars would agree that all the way down to the Apostle Paul, they would have been very studied in these books. And they would have believed this theology. Matter of fact, Paul, you find a little bit of it in Paul's writings that comes out of these books. And the same is true for the New Testament writers. They were impacted by the Book of Jubilees in Enoch 1 and Enoch 2, and very much so. And so this infighting that the Jews had during this time had a tremendous impact theologically on the world that Jesus was born into. Because when Jesus came into the world, this understanding of the devil, of the end times, of there being a final judgment, that's another thing, final judgment, all of that would have come about during this intertestamental period, and the understanding of Satan and the devil as God's arch foe was fully developed then. But I want you to see that it was impacted by Israel's experiences in the exile, and then later in the land after they were invaded by the Greeks, and then later after they were invaded by the Romans. Because these things were written in some ways against Jews who did not keep the law the way the more conservative people thought that they should have. Those Hellenistic Jews, if you will. And these Hellenistic Jews and these non-Hellenistic Jews, this was a major sticking point for many people, because they felt that the law was being watered down, Jewish culture was being watered down, and so this was a way to sort of fight that. And the Hellenistic Jews felt that they were being marginalized and that they were being attacked just because of the way they were raised. And so this was sort of a dividing line. And a lot of this theology was developed, well, these people are of the devil, these people are of Satan, these people are going to go to hell one day. And all of that was being developed during this time. So that when Jesus came into the world, there was fully a developed theology of the devil, or of Satan, if you will. And there was a full development of the theology of demons and this warfare. And much of that then came through apocalyptic writing, which we see in these books as well. So this is the origin and development then of this entity called Satan. And it would, in time, impact the New Testament writers.